Go. Good afternoon, producer Susan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jersey Joe. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Has a spring sprung out where you are?
It is 81 degrees and beautiful blue skies.
And how long ago did you have snow out there?
Uh, we really didn't have a snowy winter though. But yeah, maybe a week or so ago.
Yeah, so you went from snow to 81 in what, less than 10 days?
Typical Pennsylvania.
Typical Pennsylvania weather, kind of like Colorado weather, where you can go from heat to air conditioning in the same 24-hour period. All right. Well, as usual, we got too much to cram in. I've actually had to drop some things off because of some late breaking stuff I've added in. Um, So let me kind of give you the rundown. By the way, it's the situation with Jerzee Joe. It's news and perspective you probably won't hear on TV. And so not only are there news stories you won't hear on TV, it'll be perspective on some stories you might have heard, but you might have only heard one side of the story. So we're going to give you some perspective on some of those biased news stories. Anyway, our quote of the day is from comedian Groucho Marx. Producer Sue, you know who Groucho Marx is or
I
was?
do.
I think he died before you were born, but he was a
I think
part of the
so.
Marx Brothers. He was a comedian. He actually had a game show called You Bet Your Life.
Hmm.
And our stupidest thing I've heard all week, to tell you about a piece of legislation being proposed by the Colorado legislature that would prohibit landlords from running credit checks on prospective tenants. We'll tell you about a brand new Whole Foods store in San Francisco that's shutting down after just 12 months of operation and why. We'll break down the alleged gender pay gap claim and give you the real reasons why, quote, the average woman only makes 77 cents for every dollar that the average man makes, and why gender discrimination has virtually nothing to do with it. We'll tell you how the founders of Black Lives Matter, Inc. have spent millions of dollars of donors' money. We'll tell you how one U.S. Congresswoman spent more than $100,000 of her campaign funds. And with the recent mass shootings and why and we'll talk about we've had, unfortunately, in the past couple of weeks, we had the shooting at the Tennessee school, and then we had the shooting at the Louisville bank, and the instant and immediate reaction by many is we need more gun controls. So we're going to talk about why the things they're proposing wouldn't solve the problem, and why everybody immediately says gun controls, even though gun controls won't solve the problem. Our taxpayer relief shot is from Chicago, where the manager of an auto parts store shoots and kills an armed robber. So I think we can fit that in because I dropped off about three things I wanted to talk about, but didn't think I could get them in. Because I'm going to do my little rant about what I call cognitive dissonance. Anyway, the late comedian Groucho Marx, and here's what he said about politics. He said, politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedies. What do you think about that? Was he pretty much close to reality?
Yep.
All right. Now, there's another quote that's so close to that. It's going to be a bonus day. We're going to do two quotes. And a related quote, there was a guy by the name of John Quinton once said that, and this is his quote, when politicians begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel, their reaction is to buy more tunnel. Politicians love problems. They campaign on problems. They really, many of them don't want to see the problems end because it's a campaign issue for them. So, and I'm unfortunately I see that all too often. There's a solution in sight, but no, we don't want to fix it. Have you ever seen that phenomena?
All the time with politicians, like you mentioned.
All right.
They'd be out of a job if they actually did their jobs.
Yeah. All right. Say you're a landlord. Say you had a rental property. Say you had a house or a duplex a rental property. If you were going to rent it out to somebody, wouldn't you want to do a credit check on them? See if they had any, outstanding judgments, if they'd bounced checks, if they owed their previous landlord money. Wouldn't you want to do
Absolutely.
yeah? Well, the Democrats in the Colorado legislature have introduced Senate Bill 23-184 that would make it illegal for landlords to do a credit check on a tenement. Because they say, well, it's going to discriminate against poor people. Well, if a poor person has a great credit rating, has a great track record of always paying their rent on time, has no outstanding judgment, their wages aren't garnished. I don't see how that would hurt a low income person if their credit is good.
Yeah.
But to me, just, well, that person's poor, we don't want you to do a credit check. I just think it's insanity.
Mhm.
Absolute, complete insanity. You have any opinion on that?
No, you're right. You can not be making a large amount of money, but still have excellent credit.
Right. Pay your
And
bills.
likewise, you can also make six figures and have incredibly poor credit.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've seen millionaires have to declare bankruptcy. So, your income has very, very little to do with your credit rating. I mean, in fact, it's fairly common for people, who are making six-figure incomes. They get in over their heads, they buy fancy cars, they go to Vegas and whatnot. And pretty soon, they're in over their heads. So, all right, we all know Whole Foods, right? Sometimes referred
Yep.
to as whole paychecks.
Yeah.
Well, in March of last year, which was 12 months and 2 weeks, Whole Foods opened what they called their quote flagship, their flagship store in downtown San Francisco. I'm going to switch over to here we go to the story. Now, it was a 64,000 square foot store, which is big for a grocery store. Now, let me put this in perspective. A Walmart with a grocery store is 100,000 square feet, but half the Walmart is not isn't
Mhm.
selling food. So, a Walmart is 110, 120,000 square feet. But a big grocery, 64,000 square feet for a store that only sells food is big.
Mhm.
So in March of last year, Whole Foods opened, and this is a prime. If you know anything about have you been to San Francisco?
Yes, and it's changed greatly since I've been there last.
And that's the problem. So they opened this store on the corner of 8th and Market, which is the center of downtown. And
Mhm.
after exactly 12 months, they've announced that they're going to be shutting the store down. And they said, if we feel at some point in the future we could ensure the safety of our team members, we will evaluate. They're not promising. They said we will evaluate a
Mhm.
reopening. Um, and here's what a source at City Hall told the local newspaper. He said the company had cited deteriorating street conditions around drug use and violent crime near the grocery store as the reason for closure. Um, and it goes on and on. Here we go. They said that they had just barely opened up and they began to experience extraordinarily high theft and shoplifting. I don't know if you recall, but California's passed a law that if you steal anything less than 990,000, excuse me,
Mhm.
$990, it's not a felony. And they can't even stop you. So if you walk into a Whole Foods, put a couple of prime ribs under your arm and walk out the door, it's not a felony and they can't stop you. So they've been plagued by high theft. They also wound up finding hypodermic needles in the bathrooms and even ditched in the vegetable section. Can you imagine reaching for a head of lettuce
Ugh,
and
yeah.
getting stuck with a hypodermic needle?
Mhm.
So that's why they're closing. And I want to find the other quote about how this is hurting the city of San Francisco.
I mean,
Uh,
while you're looking for that, it's been in the news. I don't know if it's CVS or Rite Aid or Walgreens or maybe all of the above. They've basically pulled out of San Francisco for safety reasons and
yep.
theft.
And this is the paragraph I was looking for. It said, since the start of the pandemic, downtown San Francisco has suffered a massive loss
Mhm.
in foot traffic. Many small businesses have been shuttered, while examples of extreme poverty, drug use, and mental illness on the street have become more apparent. Fears of
Mhm.
a doom loop in which a cascade of negative financial impacts compound have spread across the city. And City Hall officials currently expect, ready for this, a nearly 800 million deficit in San Francisco's budget because those stores are the ones that collect and pay not only property taxes, sales
Yeah.
taxes, and all the workers in those stores pay city income taxes. So you start to lose, and you take a store like a Whole Foods, between the people who are stocking shelves at night, the butchers in the back room, And the fact that it's a 7-day-a-week operation, I'd be stunned if a Whole Foods didn't employ between 300 and 400 people over the course of a 24/7 operation.
Mhm.
And then, of course, you have all the sales taxes that, the store generates, of which a good chunk, some of that goes to the state, but a good chunk of those sales taxes go to the city. So San Francisco's looking at an $800 million deficit, which means they're going to have to cut more services. So if you're a business thinking about opening in San Francisco, would you even think about opening in San Francisco right now?
Absolutely not. And frankly, I'm surprised that Whole Foods even opened a year ago, because the shutting down of all of the other stores had happened prior to that.
Well, it was, somebody had, well, let's give it a try. And
Mhm.
it's turned out to be a freaking disaster. And to open a store like that, to outfit it, put in the lighting, all the bins, because it was not a grocery store. So I used to be affiliated with a business that installed the refrigeration, the freezer cases, the dairy cases, the meat cases. You are talking just for the refrigerated, all the refrigerated cases alone, you're probably talking close to $1 million just to put the cases in, not counting all of the other lighting and display cases and racks and bakeries, and you got ovens in there. So I bet you Whole Foods sunk easily 5 million just to open the store. Before they even
Mhm.
open the door, they'd spend 5 million bucks, and they're prepared to write that off and walk away. So that's where we are, and that's a downward spiral. And maybe in a future episode, we'll talk about um, why Baltimore is in a death spiral, while Chicago is close on its heels. And right now, it looks like that San Francisco might be entering that same death spiral. And I'll elaborate more maybe in future podcasts what the death spiral is, how to recognize it, and why these cities are all following the same blueprint. All right, you want to move on to the gender pay gap?
Let's do it.
Now you've heard about it, right?
Yep, of course.
And some people are saying 77 cents on the dollar. So people are now saying it's 80 cents on the dollar. So let's talk about some ground rules. First of all, they're not comparing hourly rates of pay. They're talking about annual incomes, and that's important for a couple of reasons. One of the first of which is, let's talk about overtime. Many women are caregivers. They have children. They're either married with kids or they're single moms, and their ability to work overtime is limited, correct?
Mhm.
Whereas a guy typically does not have those same constraints. If the boss says, "Hey, Bob, can you work 3 hours overtime tonight and tomorrow?" Bob will say, "Sure can, boss," and overtime is time and a half. So first of all, when they're comparing compensation, it's annually. So if Bob say Bob works 10% overtime in the course of a year, and let's say Bob's basic rate of pay is 70,000, at 10% overtime, well, if it was straight time, it'd be 7,000, but since it's time and a half, 10% overtime on a 70,000 base pay is going to be 7 plus 30, it's going to be another $10,500 a year that Bob is going to make because he was able to work 10% overtime that year when Sally couldn't. Now, let's look at some of the other factors uh, that over the course of a year contribute. Number one, men dominate higher paying skilled trade jobs such as electricians, plumbers, carpenters, welders, diesel mechanics, HVAC techs, etc. How many? Now I know there are some, but out of 100 welders, how many do you think would be females?
I can't say that I know a female welder.
I don't either. I mean, I've seen one or two, but I've been on construction sites with 30 welders and not one was a female. I've also been on construction sites. I think you know a guy named of Chris Reed is an
Mhm.
electrician, right?
Yep, yep.
I don't think Chris Reed has ever been on a job. Maybe there's with one or two because of some requirement, but typically you don't see a lot of females in the electricians union. I'm
Mhm.
associated with a company down in the Philadelphia area that does heavy HVAC work, and they employ pipe fitters out of the pipe fitters local. They were required to on a government job to have 10% female representation. They went to the union hall and they say, "Hey, we need 4 females," and union hall says, "Sorry, we don't have any."
Mhm.
So they've got 40 some technicians, HVAC techs, every single one of them is a guy. Now, so the guys, obviously, diesel technicians, they dominate those fields. Let's talk about who dominates the lower paid jobs. Cashiers, waitresses, social workers, and even teaching. And by the way, teachers, everybody says, well, teachers are underpaid. They typically, I think the average pay for a teacher in this country is around $54,000 a year. But also remember, they only work 10 months of the year. But would you agree that if you go into Walmart, the majority of the cashiers are going to be female?
Well, I don't know about you, but when I go into Walmart, I am the cashier.
All right. Teachers, you go.
But yes, at the grocery store, the majority of the cashiers, there's a sweet elderly man who's a cashier, but the rest of them are female.
Right. And K through 12, elementary schools, the vast majority are teachers, and they're averaging $54,000 a year, while the electrician who's working in the building across the street is making $84,000 a year. Within professional fields, many women have elected to take extended leaves of absences to have and raise children. So that means that if you're a 30-year-old woman and you have taken 5 years off from your career to have one or two children, and then rejoin the workforce, after a 5-year layover, you don't have the equivalent experience or seniority as a 30-year-old male who's been working 10 years while you've only been working 5. So do you think that if you're a woman and you took 5 years off to raise children, that you should come back and automatically be paid the same as the guy who's been working for 10 years and has more seniority and more experience than you have?
Yeah, no, they should be, rightfully so. They earned 5 extra years of seniority
And 5 extra years of experience. A lot changes while you're gone. In 5 years with technology and systems and processes, a lot changes. So I don't think it's discrimination that a woman who's been out of the workforce for 5 years comes back into the workforce and is not paid as much as a 30-year-old male who has been there for 10 years straight. I don't think that's evidence of discrimination. Do you? I'm asking you as a woman.
No, I don't think so. I mean, there are valid points of,
Right.
When you're talking the blue collar jobs, I'm not sure that's necessarily the case in white collar jobs.
Right. Well, now let's go on to the higher paying fields of science, technology, engineering, and math, also known as STEM. Now, a quick check, and you can Google this, and I did, but a quick check will show that within engineering schools, and we're talking MIT, Purdue, Georgia Tech, Stanford, will show that graduates from those schools are actually commanding a higher starting wage than their male counterpart. And any idea why?
Because companies have, like you mentioned earlier, quotas to fill.
Right. They're a rare commodity, and companies have these diversity goals, and we have a goal, we're going to have X%. So the females are actually in higher demand, so they command. And I looked at my alma mater, and the females are getting about 3,000 to 5,000 more on average than their male counterparts. So on one hand, you say, well, then how come they're not making more? Well, here's the rub. Today, less than 25% of the graduates from engineering schools are females, which means males are 75%, which means, now don't get me wrong, if the average starting salary of an engineer these days is right around $70,000, I don't know what it is out at Penn State, but let's say it's depending on where you are, it's close to 68, 69, 70,000. And those are high paying jobs. But if the males who are getting those $70,000 a year jobs out of college outnumber the females by 3 to 1, the fact that the females might be starting at 72 or 73 instead of 70 doesn't make up for the fact that the men outnumber them 3 to 1 when they join the workforce. So that's probably that's the third or maybe the fourth reason that explains the pay gap. By the way, within unions, within trade unions, and which includes teachers union, by the way, there is no discrimination, particularly if you're a teacher. Your gender has nothing to do. Your pay scale is fixed by the union agreement, and it's illegal for the employer to pay a woman less. And here's one more piece of logic. Let's assume I, as an employer, could hire women for 23% less per hour, meaning 77% of the male's pay. And those women could do the exact same job as the male, but I could hire women for 23% less. Why wouldn't I hire 100% of the women?
True.
Right? Is there any reason I wouldn't hire nothing but women if I could hire them for 23% less than the guys
Yeah.
and do the exact same job?
Except there aren't any.
Except they're not there. The people with the skills I need, if I'm a construction company or if I'm an engineering company, number one, I can't find them, and number two, women engineers aren't going to work for 23% less than the male counterparts. So no, it just fails the logic test, because if in fact employers could hire women with equal qualifications for 23% less than their male counterparts, every employer in this country would be hiring nothing but women. So that's why the claim that there's gender-based discrimination in hiring is absolute nonsense, and it fails the logic test. All right, you want to move on to how Black Lives Matter has been spending the donors' money?
How have they been spending the money?
Well, first, let's back up. About 6 months ago, they were dinged. It turns out if you're a nonprofit, and I think you're affiliated with nonprofit, you know that nonprofits have to file a form every year with the IRS?
Yep.
It's called an IRS Form 990, and by the way, it's public record. It shows how much you took in, what your expenses were, who your offices are. Now, nonprofits don't pay taxes, but they still have to disclose, and it's public record. IRS Form 990. Well, it turned out that Black Lives Matter, Inc., which, by the way, I think had collected over $30 million in donations, hadn't filed their Form 990. And when she was told that she was delinquent, and she was approached by a newspaper reporter, here's what she said. Here's what the founder, a woman named Patricia Kuller, she said, "I'm like, ugh, it's like triggering," saying that she actually did not know what the form was before all this happened. Kuller went on to claim filing the financial disclosure forms doesn't seem safe for us. This is like deeply unsafe. This is literally being weaponized against us, against the people we work with, she said, seeming to allege that people within BLM organization have been attacked and scrutinized for their financial activities. Well, has that scrutinization been warranted? Well, it turns out that you decide. They had spent, it turns out, $5.8 million on a Los Angeles mansion, to which they decided to house the Black Lives Matter, Inc. organization. $5.8 million. Now, they could have rented space in an office building, but no, Black Lives Matter, we want to headquarter our charity out of a $5.8 million Los Angeles mansion, which we're going to pay cash for. Then she, as the founder, turns out she bought for herself a $1.4 million home in Beverly Hills, even though she was living in the $5.8 million Los Angeles mansion. Then it turns out the co-founder's brother was paid $840,000 for allegedly providing, quote, security services to the organization. Imagine $840,000. Do you know how many private security guards you could hire for half that amount? This was paid to one guy, $840,000 for security services. Meanwhile, the organization paid a company owned by a guy named Damon Turner, who is the father of a child, who is the father of Kuller's child. They paid him $970,000 to, quote, produce live events as well as other creative services. Now, you get involved in producing events, don't you?
Yep.
I don't know how many live events they produce, but $970,000 for a year seems like quite a lot of money to produce, to quote, produce an unspecified number of live events. Other than some riots, I'm not really aware of any live events that Black Lives Matter has has organized and sponsored. Have you?
I don't doubt that they probably have. I can't say that I could name an event that they
No.
produced, but I'm sure that there might be a couple.
All right. Well, anyway, that's how Black Lives Matter Inc. has been spending literally millions of dollars of donors' money. And they were offended when they were told they had to file a IRS Form 990. They called it triggering. Anyway, that's my rant about Black Lives Matter Inc. Don't get me wrong. I fully support the Black Lives Matter movement. I think it's a great movement. We need to, the Black Lives Matter are absolutely true. I won't argue with that. I think we need to be more sensitive. Police need to be more sensitive and not so quick to assume that every Black person they stop and talk to, is dangerous. So I fully support the concept and the spirit behind Black Lives Matter. However, I think Black Lives Matter Inc. Has a lot of problems as an organization. All
I
right.
think anybody who donates money to any charity needs to do their due diligence and checks and balances and accountability.
Right. And the same should probably hold true.
That goes for any 501c3, not just a BLM or
exactly. And they
this
all
organization
right. And they all have a Form 990. And if you have any doubts or thoughts or just want to investigate, just Google your 501c3's name and put in for IRS Form 990, and it should pop up, and they'll show you how much they took in, how much they paid their officers, what they spent. So again, you can do that for any charity, not just the 501c3, but 501c4s like the Elks, the Rotarians, even labor unions, by the way, which are also tax exempt. So let's move on to Representative Cori Bush out of Missouri, Democrat out of Missouri. She has used $137,000 of her campaign funds since 2020 for unspecified security services, which she paid to. Now, remember, this is for security. She paid that $137,000 and recorded it as security service. She paid it to her, quote, spiritual advisor, who is on record as being an anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. He has been, I don't know if you remember, Malcolm X used to talk about, the Jews and say this guy he's a rampant, out in the open, anti-Semitic Jew hater. And she has paid him $137,000 for, quote, security services. I'm speculating there's some sort of romantic relationship there. But again, that's that to me, that's a very questionable use of campaign funds. If you were donating to her campaign, would you be disappointed to find out that she used $137,000?
Yes, again, to my original point of accountability and checks and balances.
Right.
Do your due diligence, people.
All right. So let's move on to this unfortunate, to our recent tragedies. Every single time there's a mass shooting, you hear more gun controls. And even when the data shows that what people are calling, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to have more mental, we need to, almost in every case, what they're calling for, when you look at what they're calling for and what happened, and you apply the proposed solution, it wouldn't have prevented the incident. Well, we need more universal background checks. Well, guess what? The guy that shot up the bank bought his gun with a background check. Well, we need a waiting period. He bought his gun a week earlier. The Tennessee school shooter, she had 7 guns. She bought each and every one with a background check. Waiting periods, she had bought those guns months earlier. So waiting periods, background checks, none of them make any difference. And I could go on, I won't go on and on, but I want to talk about something called cognitive dissonance. Are you familiar with the term?
Yes.
All right. For those who are not familiar with the term, evolution and nature have trained us to make a safe environment for ourselves and our families. And that's why we lock our doors at night and put new batteries in our smoke detectors once a year. Those members of our species that didn't follow their instincts fell prey to various threats. Cognitive dissonance, which is also known as psychological stress, occurs when new information is received that challenges or conflicts with our existing beliefs or values. When that occurs, the human instinct is to minimize the conflict. An example is a smoker who knows that smoking is bad for them, suffers from cognitive dissonance every time they buy a pack of cigarettes or light one up. And so they try and minimize that psychological conflict by telling themselves, well, not everybody who smokes get cancer, or they start buying ultralight versions, believing that those cigarettes are not as harmful as the regular cigarettes, which is all nonsense. So now we come to mass murders of innocent kids in schools or strangers in public places. The fact that you, your kids, or your entire family could be killed in less than a minute with no warning by a total stranger in a public place sets up a cognitive dissonance event that conflicts with your event that you have created a safe environment for your family, and or that the government should be able to keep you safe, and that you should be able to live your life without fear of harm by others. Well, just like the smoker who buys ultralight cigarettes, the need, excuse me, I'm going to have to sneeze. Oh, goodness.
It'll be 3 sneezes, people.
4. Yeah, excuse me, people. Old family tradition. Everybody in my family on my mother's side sneezes 4 times. Anyway, but just like the smoker who buys ultralight cigarettes, the need to reduce dissonance results in the natural instinct to do something, anything, regardless of the ultimate effectiveness of that action. And those governed by emotions will fixate on the tools, in this case, the gun, and not deal with the fact that a crazy or evil person can always find a way to commit mass murder even without a gun. The terrorist who drove a truck into the Bastille Day crowd in Nice, France in 2016 killed 86 people and injured another 458 in under 60 seconds. So he didn't need a gun to kill 86 people, which is more than it's ever been killed in any mass shooting, by the way. So why fixate on the gun? Well, trying to control the access to the type and quantity of the tool provides the person ruled by emotion with a tangible course of action, which, if achieved, will reduce the level of cognitive dissonance associated with the perceived threat to him and his family, even if achieving that goal hasn't actually reduced the threat. Those ruled by rational thought and broad knowledge of the many ways to create mass casualties without a gun understand that further restricting access to various types of guns won't meaningfully reduce the threat to ourselves and our families, because the threat is not the gun, the threat is the evil or crazy person. We, those who understand that, have reduced our cognitive dissonance not by lobbying for more gun controls, but by altering our beliefs and accepting the fact that there is no way to create and live in an environment that is 100% safe for ourselves and our families, and that we can't control the actions of those evil, crazy people who wish to do us harm. So lobbying for more gun controls is a coping mechanism used by those ruled by emotion in an effort to reduce their cognitive dissonance with regard to how dangerous the world is versus how they believe it should be. The alternative would be for them to acknowledge that the world is a dangerous place and that you can't protect yourself and your family from random acts of evil or crazy people. Getting people to discard their belief systems is not an easy thing to do, hence the 50-year and never-ending cry for more gun controls. You have to accept the fact that you cannot make your environment 100% safe. And just like when you go swimming in the ocean, you could get bit by a shark. You accept that when you go in the ocean. You have to accept the fact that more gun controls will not make you safe. Anyway, I know we're starting to run out of time.
Mm-hmm.
How much time do we have left?
You just have about 5 minutes.
All right, well, I'll play real quick. Why do we call them taxpayer relief shots? I will let the sheriff of Santa Rosa County explain that to you. And here we go.
Somebody's breaking in your house, you're more than welcome to shoot them in Santa Rosa County. We prefer that you do, actually. Hopefully you'll save taxpayers money.
And again, the sheriff has it exactly right. Trying a thug and putting him in jail for 10 years cost the taxpayers just about $1 million. So let's talk about Chicago, where the manager of an auto parts store is confronted by a guy with a gun. And let's see if we can get this to play without the ad, which I thought I skipped the ad, but let's see what happens here. We're waiting for the 10-second ad to pause. 3, 2, 1, and here's skip ad.
When we police are still trying to piece together at this hour reports that a Southside store manager shot and killed a man attempting to rob his store. Fox 32's Nate Rogers with late details from Calumet Heights tonight. Nate?
This was indeed a very frightening situation for many customers and workers inside of the store right now. Those employees left the store not providing a lot of details tonight, but the damage left behind definitely significant.
93rd and Stony 93 and Stony, driver of a Burgundy Chevy Impala, pulled out a gun on the collar of the car.
An alleged attempted robber dead after visiting this Southside O'Reilly's Auto Parts.
420, is there a person shot?
It's coming over as a person shot at the O'Reilly. Way the ticket reads, he tried to rob them, and the manager shot him.
A detective here snapping photos of the area inside the store's vestibule, multiple bullet holes seen, shattered glass, and a gun found on the ground right near the entrance. Police say a man in his 30s or 40s entered the store demanding money from the register. The store manager, who has a valid FOID card, according to police, shot the man. He died at the hospital.
Like, that's right around the corner where I live.
It happened here at 91st and Stony Island around 2:30 p.m. with workers and customers inside at the time. At least 16 evidence markers could be seen left behind. Fisher Hughes has lived in the community 5 years. He says he's met the store manager many times. Tell me about the store manager, your interaction with him. Good guy? What?
Yes, he's a nice guy. Nice, very helpful. It seems like he's been with the company for a while because he's very professional. That's about all I know. And then he's a Christian guy. He was playing Christian music at one time I went in.
Police spent about 3 hours at the crime scene interviewing witnesses and looking through surveillance footage. Residents left stunned.
Oh my God. Yes, I'm gonna be praying.
And right now, Board of Crews is still cleaning up all of the mess here that was left behind. We also, of course, reached out to O'Reilly's Auto Parts for a comment on this issue, if not yet heard back. We're also still waiting to learn the name of the suspect involved in this situation. Of course, Area 2 still investigating. Reporting on the city's south side, Nate Rogers, Fox 32, Chicago.
All right, so in this case, he was not DRT, he was DOA. They got him to the hospital, but he was DOA, not DRT. All right, well, with that, I know we're running out of time, so I want to thank you for listening. If you want to learn more, go to the Jerzee Joe, Jerzee, jerziejoe.com website. If you want to send me an email with a suggestion or a question, or if you want a copy of any things I've talked about, just send me an email to joe@jerziejoe.com. Again, JER as in Roger, Z as in zebra, jerziejoe.com, and I'll be happy to answer your questions or forward any of the material we talked about. With that, Producer Susan, anything you want to add?
Get out and enjoy this beautiful sunshine.
I will do that. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care.
All right. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.